It was a crisp autumn evening when Mark decided to take a detour on his way home from work, driving along the winding back roads of his small hometown. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the fields, and the wind carried a faint chill that hinted at the coming winter. He had always been drawn to the old Miller Farmhouse at the edge of town, a dilapidated structure that had stood abandoned for decades, rumored to be haunted ever since the tragic fire that had claimed the lives of the Miller family. Mark wasn't a believer in ghosts, but he had a fascination with the unexplained. Tonight, armed with a flashlight and a handheld recorder, he wanted to see for himself if the stories were true. As he approached the farmhouse, the air seemed to thicken, heavy with the scent of damp wood and decay. The porch sagged under the weight of time, and the windows were dark, some broken. There he stepped onto the creaking porch, each board groaning under his weight. The front door, surprisingly intact despite years of neglect, seemed to beckon him inside. Taking a deep breath, Mark pushed it open, and a musty, almost metallic smell hit him. Dust swirled in the beam of his flashlight as he stepped into the main hallway. The air was thick, and he could hear the faint sound of dripping water somewhere in the distance, echoing off the cracked walls. Mark's flashlight illuminated the remnants of a once cozy home. Faded wallpaper peeling from the walls, charred furniture remnants, and photographs blackened by smoke. But as he ventured further, he noticed something strange. Footsteps, soft and deliberate, following his own, though the floorboards ahead of him were cracked and empty. A cold draft whispered past him, carrying faint whispers that seemed almost intelligible. But, propelled by curiosity, Mark moved into the living room, where a grand piano had been scorched black in the fire. He approached it cautiously, the recorder in his hand, capturing every subtle sound. Then he heard it, a soft, mournful melody, as if the piano were playing itself. Mark froze. The notes were sorrowful, haunting, and perfectly clear. No wind could make such a tune, and no human hand was visible. His pulse quickened, and a chill ran down his spine. Mark's eyes darted around the room, trying to locate the source of the eerie music. The piano keys moved on their own, each note resonating with an almost human-like sorrow. He felt a weight pressing on his chest, as if the very air of the room had thickened into something alive. A sudden creak behind him made him spin around, flashlight trembling in his hands. Shadows danced across the walls, warped and twisted by the flickering light, forming shapes that seemed almost human. He stepped back toward the hallway, hoping to retreat, but the door he had entered through now appeared farther away, distorted, almost as if the house itself had shifted. The whispers grew louder, forming fragmented phrases, Why did you leave us? Come back. Stay. Mark's heart pounded. He wanted to run, but his feet felt glued to the floor. The recorder in his hand suddenly emitted a high-pitched squeal, then a voice, distinct, soft, and pleading, emanated from it. Don't leave. Summoning all his courage, Mark turned toward the staircase leading to the upper floor. He felt drawn, almost pulled, by a force he couldn't explain. Each step creaked under his weight, and the cold intensified, biting through his jacket. On the second floor, he found a small bedroom, untouched by the fire, the walls still adorned with faded wallpaper, and a single bed, neatly made as if waiting for someone. On the bed lay an old, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. Instinctively, he picked it up. As he flipped through the pages, he discovered entries that chronicled the final days of the Miller family. The writing was frantic, filled with mentions of shadows, voices, and a presence that wouldn't leave. One entry in particular chilled him. It watches. It waits. Don't listen, or it will follow. Suddenly, a cold gust slammed the door behind him, making the room plunge into darkness. Mark's flashlight flickered and then died, leaving him in near total blackness. He could hear it now. Soft footsteps circling the room. Slow, deliberate. The air felt heavier, constricting around him. He wanted to scream, but his voice refused to form words. Then, faintly, a child's laughter. The laughter grew louder, bouncing off the walls in an unnatural rhythm, as if the room itself were mocking him. Mark's fingers clutched the journal, his only tether to reality. But even the words seemed to blur before his eyes, the ink writhing like living creatures. A shadow detached itself from the corner, stretching across the room like liquid darkness, curling toward him with a slow, deliberate menace. Mark stumbled backward, heart hammering, tripping over the edge of the bed and falling hard onto the wooden floor. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he barely noticed. His focus was entirely on the moving shadow, its shape now resembling a twisted silhouette of a person, yet its limbs bent in impossible angles, its head tilting unnaturally. He forced himself to crawl toward the door, fumbling with the knob, but it was stuck, sealed by an invisible force. The room pulsed with an oppressive energy, and Mark could feel his own fear amplifying it, feeding the entity. He pressed his palm against the cold walls, desperate for some way out. When the shadow lunged, he flinched, expecting to be engulfed, but it paused, hovering inches from him. Then, in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once, a whisper slithered into his mind. You shouldn't be here. Could it still be here? Acting on instinct, he grabbed the journal and began reading aloud, the words trembling on his lips. The shadow recoiled slightly at the sound, hissing like a wounded animal. The temperature in the room dropped further, frost forming along the edges of the window, the breath of unseen entities fogging his vision. Then the whispers changed, no longer pleading, they screamed. The air vibrated with energy, and Mark's knees buckled. He closed his eyes, chanting as best he could, the voice of the house responding, screaming in anguish. For a moment, everything stopped. Silence. The shadow froze mid-air, a tense stillness that made Mark's blood run cold. And then, with a sudden rush, it vanished, leaving only the cold, empty room behind. Mark fell back against the wall, gasping for breath, the journal slipping from his fingers onto the floor with a thud that echoed through the house. Mark remained on the floor for what felt like hours, too exhausted and terrified to move. The oppressive weight that had filled the room was gone, replaced by an eerie, almost unnatural calm. His ears still rang with the echo of the whispers, and his eyes darted nervously around the dimly lit room, half expecting the shadow to return. The journal lay open in front of him, its pages trembling as if stirred by an invisible hand. Gathering the last of his courage, he forced himself to stand, wincing at the soreness of his body, and slowly approached the door. To his relief, it now turned easily, swinging open to reveal the hallway beyond. The house seemed quieter than before, though not peaceful, just empty, holding its secrets close. Mark took a cautious step outside, the cold night air hitting him like a blast. He glanced back at the house, its windows dark and lifeless. Yet he could have sworn he saw a faint silhouette watching him from the upper floor. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to keep walking, not daring to look back again. Once he reached his car, Mark fumbled with the keys, finally managing to unlock the door. He sank into the driver's seat, shaking uncontrollably, the journal clutched tightly against his chest. He started the engine, tires crunching on the gravel driveway as he sped away, not stopping until the haunted house was far behind him. Even then, the events of that night haunted him, lingering in the corners of his mind. He knew he had survived, but the shadows of the Miller house would never leave him completely. Every creak, every whisper of wind reminded him that some things are meant to remain buried, and some secrets are never truly gone. Mark never returned to Salem. He kept the journal locked away, never daring to read it again. Yet sometimes, late at night, he could hear faint laughter echoing in the distance, or catch a glimpse of something moving just beyond the corner of his eye. And every time, a cold shiver ran down his spine, a reminder that the darkness had not entirely released him. The Miller house had marked him forever, and he understood at last that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed.